already met the congressman. I know him well because I've heard from many members of the congressional delegation talk about him, and they talk about him in glowing terms. So you have obviously elected a very, very good man, to say the least. Many of you know that he is now in his first term in the United States Congress, replacing Carol Shea Porter. He's a lifelong resident of this great city of Manchester, where he's perhaps best known for his family's popular restaurant, the Puritan Back Room, which he has helped run since graduating from that little school down in Cambridge. You may have heard of Harvard University. And the joke yesterday with Charlie Baker, if you heard it on the TV, Charlie was accepted in Harvard by checking off the right box. Liberal. But, you know, I'm not saying this, you're Congressman the liberal, I'm just saying that's how Charlie, that was a joke. Just a joke, you know. But he entered public service in 2002 when he was elected to the New Hampshire State Legislature, where he served for 2 terms. He went on to serve 2 terms, Hillsborough County Treasurer, and then later was elected to New Hampshire Executive Council to represent District 14, which includes 19 communities.
District 4.
District 4? Oh, I have 14 here. What, I think under redistricting, I think they changed them to 14. They probably didn't tell. Yeah, Lou Delisano says, no, it's 14. I said, are you sure? Yeah, they just did the map last night. Okay, I didn't know. This is what's very, very important in the 116th Congress. He's been appointed to two very important committees. And again, as a freshman, to be on these 2 committees says a lot of how people view him. First, he serves in the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, where he'll be on the front lines of any effort to pass a major infrastructure investment package in the near future. So it's critical that New England has a seat at the table in these important negotiations. So we're fortunate to have the congressman there. I think there's only one other congressman in New England that's on this committee, and that's Stephen Lynch in Boston. So we need another voice to advocate for New England, and the leadership of the Democratic caucus has chosen Chris to be that voice. He's also going to serve in the House Veterans Affairs Committee, where he has pledged to be an advocate for the region's veterans and to fight to expand access to services, benefits, and resources for those who have bravely served our country. And I know there's some veterans that are here today, and they already approached me by saying they were excited to hear that he's been appointed to this committee. So these are 2 important committees for our region. So needless to say, the leadership thinks very, very highly of him. His colleagues think very highly of him. And I think he's going to be an outstanding representative for your district here, and you've chosen wisely. And with that, we're honored that he's about to make his maiden speech here to the New England Council. So we're honored that you could join us here today. We're very eager to hear from you, and give a warm welcome to the Honorable Congressman Chris Pappas.
Well, Jim, thank you very much for that kind introduction. And just to be clear here, this is not the breakfast where presidential candidates show up to speak to this group, right? I just want to make sure I'm at the right one here. Well, thank you for what you do, Jim, to really take things to the next level for the New England Council and the collective voice that represents for folks across the region. I know as I get into my role, it's really helpful to hear from people back home. I've met with some of you in my office, and I know my staff looks forward to other ways that we can engage you as time moves on. And you know, knowing where the New England Council stands on an issue is critically important for us as a region to make those right decisions and make sure that we're advocating appropriately down in Washington. So congratulations to Jim, the New England Council, and the staff for all that they've done here. It's great to see so many familiar faces in the crowd. Senator D'Alessandro, welcome. Nice to be with you here this morning. I know we have Representative Danielson as well, who represents Bedford. Great to see you guys. Thanks for all you do to give back to our state. And I just have to say, it's an honor to be serving you all. I've served you in other capacities, certainly in my restaurant business, where I know I've seen many of you over the years. Usually the top question I get in Washington when people come into the office is, where are the chicken tenders and the ice cream? We're working on that. There have been some other priorities that have gotten in the way, but maybe we'll solve that riddle before the term is up. I've certainly learned countless lessons about the world around me from that restaurant experience. I've learned that it's not about you or the bottom line, but about how you can serve those around you and about how you can serve the customer. And I've learned that you should treat people with dignity and respect. You should treat people as members of your extended family. The customer always comes first. I'm really excited that we have a couple of offices that we're going to be opening in New Hampshire so that we can serve the constituents of the state. We have one in Dover that's up and running, a second one that's going to be opening on Elm Street in Manchester, which is actually going to occupy the footprint of the restaurant that my great-grandfather opened in the early 1900s. It's going to be in the same location. So we're literally coming full circle with the restaurant experience and I guess how that has well informed me and steeped me in the values of this community, and I think how we can address our role in a responsible manner. Look, I think we all understand that there's a stark disconnect between Washington, D.C. and between how we can get things done and move things forward here in the Granite State. We have a state that is driven by this community spirit, by a citizen-led democracy. And I think from the outside, Washington looks like a morass where it's just sort of a race to the bottom in terms of the negative politics that divide us. Here we can talk to one another, we can get things done, we can make a difference. The divide in our nation's capital is as wide as ever, but I think we can't accept that this is business as usual. I got a lot of advice when I was running for Congress, some of it better than others. When I was thinking about running early on, I had several people tell me, don't do it. Washington is beyond repair. There's nothing you can do about it to change a broken system. And I don't want to believe that that's as good as we're going to get. And I think we all recognize that unless we're involved, unless we're part of the positive change that we all know we want to see, then we're not going to get any better. So I'm really thrilled to be a part of it, and thrilled that we have such a vibrant incoming class, the largest since Watergate, that I think has a great shot at not becoming part of the system, but changing the system fundamentally. So at the end of 12 months of campaigning, I finished more optimistic than when I started out. Optimistic because I met so many people across this state. And you know, the people of New Hampshire are very kind, decent, they're engaged. And I think if we continue to look for ways to model ourselves in Washington after the direct democracy that we have here in New Hampshire. You know, we just had town meeting day, we have this presidential primary that's rolling forward. That's how we're going to get a system that's more responsive. So our class, I think, is deeply rooted in our own districts. We're more proximate to the people than anyone else in Congress. And in terms of the Republicans and Democrats that are there, we're the largest class since Watergate. We have more women and more people of color than at any time in the history of Congress. We're also 10 years younger on average than the rest of Congress, which is an interesting factor, and I think has really helped us sort of bring about a refreshing of the institution. I was in an elevator on swearing-in day, and there were so many people that were excited to be there to support family members. I was with a group of family members of a more senior member of Congress. I was telling them how I was very excited to be there, how I was so thrilled to be working for the people of New Hampshire. And after a few minutes, they said, "So, which member of Congress are you interning for?" And in talking to some of my colleagues, they've had similar experiences. You know, I'm actually a little bit older than some of the incoming members of Congress. We've got some 29-year-olds, and so this is not an uncommon occurrence. But I think it tells you that we look a little bit different than Congress has traditionally looked, and I think that's a good thing. Look, I think we all hope to get down to business right off the bat, but we came in the midst of the longest government shutdown in American history. And that was very frustrating for those of us that were eager to get to work, especially when you consider that 800,000 federal workers were being used essentially as political pawns. They weren't getting paid. They were furloughed for 35 days. I spent January and part of February working with our staff here in New Hampshire, trying to help thousands of federal workers that needed financial support. And what was really amazing to see was that so many businesses and banks and credit unions stepped forward to assist these individuals. And that's really the New Hampshire way of doing business. But it shouldn't have fallen on their shoulders to have solved that puzzle. It should have been our government that got it right and never got into that situation in the first place. I hope there are a few takeaways from that shutdown. First, I think shutting down the government is never an appropriate strategy to get your way in our political system. And second, I think if we can get everyone in a room, if we can keep people talking, then we can find compromise that may seem even elusive. I hope the deal that ended the shutdown, which was brought about with a conference committee of appropriators from the House and the Senate, I hope that will be a deal that can help set the tone for how we move forward and how we work through our differences on other issues. We've got to prevent that from ever happening again, and there are lots of bills that I've co-sponsored to try to do that. My favorite is let's take away pay from the members of Congress until government is actually funded. I think if you put the financial burden on those in power as opposed to our federal workers, we would never see a shutdown like that again. And I think we all want to commit ourselves to making sure we get there. So if there's any sense of normalcy in Congress, I think it has returned since mid-February. Committees are up and running. I've begun to lean into my work on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, as well as the House Veterans Affairs Committee. These are both very bipartisan committees. They operate with a broad consensus about how to approach their missions. And I think the prospects for an infrastructure bill are great. There are two components that we need to address in such a bill. First, we need to reauthorize the FAST Act, which distributes federal highway aid to states, and it expires in 2020. New Hampshire will see a 60% cut in our federal allocation of highway dollars if nothing is done. So there's an opportunity, I think, to make additional investments beyond just reauthorizing surface transportation. The president's talked a lot about it. I think you hear Republicans and Democrats that share that view that we need to do something to improve our airports, ports, water systems, rail systems in a way that can create jobs and create the framework for economic success in the future. Representative Stephen Lynch and I are the two New England representatives on transportation, and I think we're eager to make sure that any bill that moves forward meets the needs of our region and creates stability and predictability for states in terms of the funding that comes from Washington. Since 2005, we've seen a 20% decrease in the federal share of transportation investment. So that represents sort of a downshifting of costs to states and municipalities, and I think we've got to make sure that the federal government steps up to the plate in a more meaningful way, and that we do it in a way where there is stability to the funding stream moving forward. You know, New Hampshire, interestingly enough, gets the least amount of highway aid of any state in the country. We're even behind Vermont. We have more lane miles than Vermont does, more people than Vermont does, more geography, but yet we get about half the amount of federal dollars coming back to New Hampshire than Vermont does. And so one of the things I want to urge the committee to take a look at is the fairness in the allocation, in the formula that distributes highway grants to New Hampshire. I happen to be the only New England member on the Veterans Affairs Committee, where there's certainly much work to do. I think we're all familiar with the experience at the Manchester VA, the significant concerns that have arisen over the last few years, the leadership change, which I think many of us recognize as a breath of fresh air for that facility. And I look forward to working with the new leadership and the director to make sure that we oversee this period of transition. We have also seen a number of key pieces of legislation passed in the last session, such as the VA Mission Act, which we need to make sure that we oversee the implementation of in a way that lives up to the promise that we've all made to our veterans. I'm going to be chairing the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee of the VA Committee. I'm one of 14 freshmen who's chairing a subcommittee. And as I said, implementation is an important responsibility of that subcommittee, as well as ensuring that there's no undue influence of outside actors over the VA. And there have been some questions raised around that, and we will be having hearings coming up over the next few weeks. So I think those are some good bipartisan committees. Beyond that, there are two task forces that I've signed up to join, one on PFAS, which I think is critically important to this district. And in addition to that, there's the opioids task force that Andy Custer chairs. And we need to continue to insist that New Hampshire gets the dollars it needs to fully build out this hub and spoke approach, which I think holds great promise for us to make sure that there are access points all over our state. So the flow of business in the House has begun to move forward. We've seen legislation move through the House, including some marquee pieces of legislation. We, in a bipartisan, bicameral way, passed a resolution that was looking to undo the national emergency declaration that the president issued. I think there's broad concern about what that would do to military construction dollars, especially with respect to the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. That is a $1 billion economic engine for the region, 7,000 jobs there. We have to protect the projects that are underway and the ones that are just over the horizon to make sure we can continue to modernize that facility. In addition to that, the House passed H.R. 4, which is a universal background check bill. It's a broadly supported bill by the American people that I think is a common sense measure that's going to help us address the issue of gun safety, save lives, while respecting the rights of responsible gun owners. We passed H.R. 1, which is a democracy reform package, shores up ethics rules, limits the influence of big money in our campaigns, makes it easier and not harder to vote. And we also introduced a bipartisan group of us last week, the Equality Act, which ensures that we ban discrimination against the LGBT community all across this nation. In the coming weeks, I think we'll also see bipartisan bills around shoring up the healthcare exchanges and lowering the cost of prescription drugs. So look, the American people spoke loudly and clearly this past fall. They wanted us to work together. And I think we're seeing the beginnings of this. We're seeing some important work that's being done. And oftentimes, I think you'll see the news and you'll see the most extreme or outrageous statement that someone's made, and you'll wonder what's happening down there. But from the inside, what I can tell you is that there's a dedication to trying to get this right, to trying to move past the divisions of even earlier this year, to find our footing and find a way where we can serve the people of this nation in a responsible manner. And I'm dedicated to doing that in a way that owns up to the values of our state. You know, when I walk to the Capitol each and every day, I feel the weight of the responsibility that the people of New Hampshire have placed in me. And there are certainly significant challenges, but I think they could be met if we remain proximate to our values and to the people. I also think of the advice that a more senior member of Congress gave me. He said, you have a very important job, but you are not a very important person. And as a Granite Stater, I wouldn't have it any other way. So I certainly look forward to working with all of you over the next couple of years. I thank you for what you do for our community and our state.